Hi kids, welcome to Morning Coffee with Craig. And today I thought I'd talk about that rather large concept which is called globalisation. And the reason I'm going to talk about that today is because there's a whole series of protests against a certain type of globalisation that is planned in Melbourne, or being planned in Melbourne at the moment. And this is similar to another period about 6 years ago, on September the 11th, 2000, where there was another big protest in Melbourne against globalisation. And in 2000 it was against a body called the World Economic Forum that was meeting in Melbourne. And this time it's against a forum called G20, which is the meeting of a number 20 of the finance ministers from some of the world's most economically powerful countries. Now, the protesters are mostly dissatisfied with some of the major or driving ideas of that style of globalisation that comes from some of these large economic institutions like the G20. Now, the major ideology that's driving these institutions is what's called neoliberalism, and neoliberalism is basically about privatisation. So it's about taking what was previously in the public sphere under the control of state and national governments and placing it in the global market. And this is the dominant idea that's driving this particular wave of globalisation. And another big entity in that globalisation debate, another large international institution, is called the World Trade Organization. And the World Trade Organization was started after the Second World War, and it was primarily to have a place where states could negotiate trade agreements and stop the likelihood of wars happening, either trade wars or real wars over trade, which had happened in the past through the large European between the large European imperial powers. So what it was set up then was called what was set up after the Second World War was called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and that sort of morphed into what's called the World Trade Organization in 1995. So a lot of these ideologies of free trade or trade liberalisation, meaning that goods and services can flow. They don't really flow, but it's just a metaphor. But they can flow around the world, sort of unhindered by national borders and stuff like that. But there's an extraordinary lot of problems with that. One is that this style of globalisation means that it's not necessarily fair form of globalisation. It just means that other people have the upper hand. So very much large corporations and multinationals that have the upper hand in a lot of cases. In Australia, you probably don't notice it as much as you do in poorer countries. And poorer countries, some of these large multinational corporations have more power than the actual on the global stage than the actual country that they're operating in. Much more economic power and probably much more political power as well. So a lot of people have are very pissed off about this sort of or monomania, this almost market fundamentalism that exists in a lot of these big global institutions. And people would like a different type of globalisation. Remember, globalisation isn't a blanket term for everything. It's just a set of ideas. So in Australia, we understand that nationalism is just a set of ideas. And nationalism, it's never going to go away. And nationalism is not good or bad, nor is it neutral. Nationalism can be used for all sorts of good things, and it can be used for bad things as well. And I suppose the height of bad nationalism was during the Nazi era, when Hitler used it to propagate certain racial myths and stuff like that. But globalism or globalisation as a set of ideas, it can be used in a number of different ways as well. And at the moment, it's just one group of people who have a liberal idea or a libertarian idea of how the world should be ordered, and it's basically just it's basically that large markets screw literally smaller markets. So the larger countries like free trade because they can have the biggest factories, and they can have they can get economies of scale and stuff, when the smaller countries often need to manage their economy in a different way through trade, through certain barriers to trade. And there's nothing wrong with barriers to trade. A barrier to trade simply means that a nation can navigate itself through the world on its own terms. So there's a lot of protests that are going to be planned for a week in November, and there's details below on the blog here. So and the G20 ministers are meeting in what's called the Grand Hyatt Hotel here in Melbourne, and I really hope that meetings like this politicise a whole bunch of progressive groups in Melbourne, so they can go on to do better things. But I also hope that some of the discourse, some of the discussions on globalisation become institutionalised in a much more progressive way. It isn't the nation state or whatever that is our enemy. It's the nation state that belongs to us. It's all we've got. And so it's up to us as progressive people to civilise the nation state and make sure that it acts on the global stage in a progressive way, because increasingly there is going to be a lot of non-nation state actors that are acting on that global stage, and there's a number of crises that are looming, which are going to need really good people in that global governance world. The looming ones are health, global warming, and perhaps some sort of economic crisis. So the thing is that as soon as the world is interlinked, like we're doing now, interlinking is fine. It's great. It means you can get money out of the ATM when you're in the UK or something like that. But on the flip side of that is when there's a catastrophe or a crisis, it means we're all in it together. So if there's a big health crisis, then everyone in the world is going to be affected. We're just one big germ pool. And it's the same if there's an economic crisis. If the United States goes down in flames because of certain belligerent leadership or something like that, then the rest of the world is going to suffer significantly economically as well, because we're so intertwined. Australia is maybe 25-30% of its GDP is derived from trade. Other countries it can be much as 50-60%, stuff like that. So we're exposed to the rest of the world in lots and lots of different ways. Our sovereignty is so tied up with the rest of the world, and that has enormous dangers. And so the thing is, we have to develop international governance treaties very, very quickly, and they have to be reasonably progressive, and they have to take account of all the people in the world and not just a few people. So thanks very much for your time today, and have a good weekend. Bye bye.